Today, we want to talk about how to make your message captivating. Writers, journalists, speakers, preachers, and teachers, what do? Well, a writer texts, a journalist reports, a speaker talks, a preacher instructs, a teacher informs, and a storyteller, they captivate. Writers, journalists, speakers, and teachers are boring until they tell a story. What makes a story? A character in a situation of desperate want, facing obstacles of consequence. The end must be different from the beginning, where something is learned. That changes the character for better or worse. And there's more to come. What do we do? How do we build a captivating story? Well, before the writing begins, should we outline the plot, define character traits, and know what will happen? Or should we just write and let one thing lead to another? Should we do outlining or write by the seat of our pants? Well, detailed outlines tend to force behavior that doesn't fit the character. And pantsing rambles without plot points necessary for a clear sense of direction and purpose. So, what we have are 7 crucial elements for the emotional journey. I put it in an easy to remember acronym that spells out scoop it up. And what are those elements? We need to look at those. Their situation, character, objective, obstacle, and plight. That spells scoop. And then we have insight and transformation. That's the it word. And then we have the unresolved problem, the up word. So how might we develop all this as just a really simple way to know that we have the essential elements to captivate our audience in each scene, chapter, and book? So here we go. We got a situation. That's the S word. That is the where and when. Readers must know where they are in place and time, or they are lost. So we have a situation. I wonder, what might we suggest is a situation? What can you imagine? We want a time and place. So let's put in whatever time and place you would like to have. What can you imagine? When is it? New York City in on busy streets in 1903. How's that for a situation? Okay, let's go with that. It can be whatever you want. There's the situation. New York City on busy streets in 1903. We're just going to set up the situation, and then we're going to go on. We have a character. That's the C word in Scoop. We need the character because that's why we care. We don't hug trees. We don't kiss the bark on trees, but we love characters and we are concerned with what's going to happen. So readers want to become the point of view character in each scene. So let's go with that. What might we want for a character? Well, let's see, a character. In 1903, New York, Irish Kurt O'Reilly is the character. That doesn't really tell us anything about a character. That's just a name. So Irish, let's say Kurt would tell us it's a man or a boy. Let's say young teenager, Kurt O'Reilly. So we got that for a character. It can be anything you imagine. So let's go with that. That's who we have for a character. And now let's go on ahead with an objective. Why do we need an objective? Well, without vision, the story perishes. We really need an objective. So what does teenage Kurt, want? Let's say he wants the privilege of driving a motor carriage. In 1903, on the streets of New York, a teenager might not be able to do that. I don't know. But let's just go with that for lack of something better. So that's our objective. We've got that set. Now we will go on and look at the obstacles, because those are crucial. Without those, we can guess at the outcome. We know what the character wants. We're just going to assume the character's going to get it. Wrong. To keep the pages turning, we have to put the outcome in doubt. So if readers can guess the conclusion, then the story has no value. So then we need to define some kind of obstacle. We just have to use our imagination and figure out what that might be. The police won't allow a teenage driver on the streets of New York except on a horse. I'm just imagining here. You have to decide, well, is that real? I don't know. It's your choice. We're just going to create an obstacle. All right, so now we have an obstacle set. And then what we want to do is look at the P word. That stands for plight. That makes the outcome matter. The higher the stakes for success or failure, the greater the impact. And so there has to be something at risk, some kind of life or death matter. So we have someone texting while they drive that could end in death. If we can make this in some way an emotional life or death matter, and then raise those stakes, we have an essential part of making this scene, or the whole book for that matter, captivating. So then, what is the plight? What's going to happen if the teenager does or doesn't get to drive a motor car? Let's just, for sake of nothing better, Kurt will be devastated if he can't learn to drive like in the big city, like his father. How does that sound? Maybe we can work with that. So now what's going to happen? Kurt is going to have this experience. He wants, we know what he wants. He wants to drive a motor car. And can he do that? Well, let's go on. When we get to the end of what we imagine is going to happen with Kurt, then there needs to be a takeaway that we define with the insight and transformation. Without a change in character, something learned through experience, the scene has no right to exist. So we need to decide, what is the character going to learn and how is the character going to change? Maybe life won't end if he is nothing better than a horseman. That's his insight. How does that change? Let's just say now he wants to race horses. And maybe he wants to race horses down Main Street of New York. I don't know. Where is this story going to go? Well, this is the insight and transformation that lets the character experience the lesson learned. And now we have a whole new set of scoop it up conditions where there's a new situation, character, objective, obstacle, and plight for the next chapter. So let us go on. Next, we have the UP of Scoop It Up, which is the fact that unresolved problems lead to the next open door. There is always a next scene, a next chapter, a next book in which the unresolved problem is what makes us want to find out, okay, what happens next? I can't put this down. I know it's 2 o'clock in the morning. I cannot put this down. So then what is going to happen? Well, let's look at this. Whatever is resolved must anticipate an escalating situation ahead, or the story has lost its momentum. So we need to define whatever this unresolved problem is. So the unresolved problem might be Dad doesn't, well, let's say Dad doesn't want him to race horses. Mom does. So can you see the unresolved problem? Now we've got a conflict between Mom and Dad and Kurt. So let's go with that unresolved problem. Then what we have done, we've gathered the Scoop It Up elements. What does that look like? Well, let's take a look. There we are, New York City on busy streets in 1903. Young teenager Kurt O'Reilly. He has this objective, the privilege of driving a motor carriage. The police won't allow a teenage driver on the streets of New York except on a horse. Kurt will be devastated if he can't learn to drive in the big city like his father. And finally, life won't end if he's nothing better than a horseman. He decides that now he wants to race horses. Dad doesn't want him to race horses. Mom does. So there we have a picture that is really good to help us write this scene. Or maybe it gives a perspective to write an entire book. So let's move on with this summary and look at what this pulls together as we could pull all this together. What if we were to take all of this and just write a summary paragraph? Okay, that's a little bit of work, isn't it? Because if we write a summary paragraph, why don't we just go ahead and write the whole chapter? Well, let me tell you that it is easier to write a paragraph or two than it is 4 or 5 pages. Does that make sense? If you take time to write a paragraph or two, it will be really good practice so that when you write several pages, you'll understand where to start, where to wind up, and all the steps that might come in between. And you might be surprised at what your character, this teenage Kurt, runs into. So then let's look at that and see what we might do with that. It's fairly simple, or it could be. We could say on the New York City busy streets in 1903, put in a comma, young teenager Kurt O'Reilly desperately wants to drive a motor carriage because there's lots of horses and not many motor carriages, and the speed limit in the city is 7 miles per hour. So then, now here is where you might find yourself wanting to change one of the Scoop It Up elements. Now is a great time to go back and fix some of those if you want to. The police won't allow a teenage driver on the streets of New York except on a horse. Kurt will be devastated if he can't learn to drive in the big city like his father. So now, if I can find the cursor on the screen, there we are. After he realizes that life won't end if he is nothing better than a horseman. Oh boy, we got to go back. Sorry about that. Back, back, back. This is where I have to practice this better. Back to this. Let's see what I got. Ah, good. We didn't lose it. So now I know if we hiccup here, we can get back. And I wasn't sure about that. After he realizes that life won't end if he is nothing better than a horseman, he wants to be the best horseman ever. In fact, he would like to race horses down Main Street. Dad doesn't want him to race horses. Mom does. Okay, so there's an unresolved problem. If the police find out, he'll be in jail. So there we are. We have the summary. We didn't take very long to write this. Can we see how going ahead and putting this into a statement that gives us a scoop-it-up perspective, we have what we need to go ahead and flesh out a chapter. If we're writing this with the perspective of an entire book, we have some of the basic elements that we might want for back cover copy. So then, this is a statement. Somewhere we might end this with a question. Kurt will be devastated. We might add here, will he have any chance of measuring up to his father's reputation in the city? Now we've raised a question that calls for an answer. That's nice. And then down here at the end, an unresolved problem. We might make this a question. Will he wind up in jail? So there we are. We can go with that. Okay? So that's what we have for a summary. Summary paragraph. Now, work with that, develop that, and then we have a scoop it up that'll take us wherever we want to go with our story. So now we can look at discussion and talk about what all this means to you, because that is the way we scoop it up.